In part 2, we saw how to set our security settings for our SRX1. We saw how we had one zone, the MyTrust1 zone, as indicated over here in the graphic. We have all three interfaces G001, 2, and 3 in this zone, the MyTrust1 zone. We saw how we have to define a policy to allow transit traffic from one interface over to and out on another interface. It is the policy that is deciding what traffic is allowed to transit from one interface to another interface within this single zone here. To fine-tune our security settings, we can put the interfaces in different zones. Let me bring up the graphic to show that. I'm showing here still the configuration for a single zone, but let us look at what it will look like for multiple zones. We have defined each interface to be in its own zone. Here we have called the zone for the GE001 subnet sensor LAN, as that is also the name that I have put on my diagram. GE002 is in the server LAN zone, and finally GE003 is in the zone interLAN 1. And now we have to define policies in order for traffic to enter into an interface in one zone, be evaluated if it is allowed to transit over to an interface in another zone, for example here GE003, and out on that interface. That would be from GE001 over to the GE003 on the interLAN 1. I have graphically up here indicated what policies we could make in order to fulfill our security specifications that we have over here. And in this particular example, from the sensor LAN to the interLAN 1, so this would be the policy deciding if the IP packet is allowed to transit from GE001 over and out on GE003. And this is the policy that I have written here. It is from zone, sensor LAN, to zone, interLAN 1. This is the entire policy. The policy says that the traffic from sensor LAN to interLAN is allowed to transit if from any source address on the sensor LAN, and if the destination address on the interLAN 1 is any, and if the application is an ICMP ping, or a transport layer UDP package, then we permit the transit to take place, as traceroute is using UDP package. This is in order to be able to use traceroute on our network. I'll move over to workstation, PC1. Let's bring up a terminal to do the ping. So I'll ping PC4, and that is working. We have already made another policy, and that policy is from the sensor LAN to the server LAN. Sensor LAN to server LAN, that's the policy over in the graphic that we have indicated here. And this policy allows traffic to transit from the sensor LAN to the server LAN if the source address is any on the sensor LAN, and if the destination address is any on the server LAN, and if the application protocol is ping or UDP, and then we cannot see the rest. Let me move it over here. Junos HTTP 80 and 8000. This should allow us to fetch a web page from PC1 over from PC2. I'll bring up workstation to see if we can fetch a web page. Let us open our browser. And we can indeed fetch our web page. Our policy from sensor LAN to server LAN is working. The policy is allowing HTTP traffic to go through in both directions. from PC1 to PC2, back from PC2 to PC1. That is what our policy over here is allowing. But what about the PC4 specifications? The PC4 specifications are controlled by the interLAN to server-LAN policy. That policy is listed here. We can see that HTTP traffic is allowed to transit from the interLAN to the server-LAN, i.e. from G003 to GE002. But what about the PC4 specification parts that says that PC4 should only be allowed to ping until 10.10.10.1? We have not specified anything in it with regard to ICMP ping traffic over in our policy. Let's try it out, how far PC4 can ping as the policies are right now. Let's bring up workstation again, PC4. We can actually ping the GE003 interface, but pinging is not going through to the GE002 interface from PC4. Let us see if PC4 can fetch web page from PC2. And that works seamlessly. Our HTTP GET requests are getting through based on our policy. But how was it possible for PC4 to ping GE003 and not GE002? The thing is that a ping request to GE003 is treated by GE003 and it is replying back without any traffic transiting our router. When PC4, on the other hand, wants to ping GE003, this ping request is coming in on GE003, going up to the routing process, being checked by the policies, and no policy is allowing ICMP traffic. The request for a ping is not going through to GE002. We do not have any policy allowing that ICMP traffic from the interLAN 1 to the server LAN. Now here's a question for you. Will PC2 be able to ping the other devices on the network? What do you think when you look at the policies listed over here? You will have to look at the server LAN to other zones policies. Do they allow ICMP traffic? What do you think? And I have a ping here from PC2 to PC4, and that is not going through. So there we have the answer. The PC2 specification up here, that PC2 should be able to ping all devices. What policy is missing here? I'll leave it to you, my dear viewer, to set up that policy. If we want to have communication between interfaces in the same zone, we can, as an example here, take G007 and put that into the sensor LAN over here. In order to have communication between G001 and G007, we would have to set up policy for the interfaces in the sensor LAN to the interfaces in the sensor LAN, i.e. from G001 to 7 and 7 to 1 over here in the policies.